Karl Wolfe worked for the military and was at Langley Air Force Base as an Air Force technician during the 1960s. While there, and in his capacity working on some devices in a very secret area of Langley, he was shown by another technician photographs taken by the lunar orbiter prior to the lunar landing of structures on the moon that were specific, artificial, and constructed of stone and other materials. Some of them were very large, and he states are unmistakable evidence that someone had been on the moon before we landed in 1969, and that there are artificial structures on the moon.
My boss came to me. I was working in a color lab at that time. I was a technician, photographic technician. I was asked to go over to this facility on Langley Air Force Base where the NSA was bringing in the information from the lunar orbiter. And so I packed up some tools. I went over. I went into the facility. A couple of officers took me into this hangar. It was a very large hangar. So they took me into this laboratory. I took a look at the equipment. There was an airman second class in there. I was an airman second class as well. He turned the equipment on and put it through its paces. It didn't do what it was supposed to do. I saw what was going on with it. And I said to him, we'll have to take this thing out of the lab if we're going to work on it. We can't work on it in here in the darkroom environment. So everyone left the facility, left the darkroom, except this airman second class and myself, and we're in waiting for someone to come to remove this piece of equipment. At the time, I didn't know what the real purpose of this darkroom and this operation in this facility was. I thought this was where they were bringing the data in and then releasing the images to the public. They were doing 35 millimeter strips of film at that time, which were then assembled into 18.5 by 11 inch mosaics, they were called. There was a digital signature and a grayscale on every 35 millimeter strip. And those strips were from successive passes around the moon. So he was showing me how all this worked, and we walked over to one side of the lab, and he said, by the way, we've discovered a base on the back side of the moon. And I said, whose? What do you mean, whose? He said, yes, we've discovered a base on the back side of the moon. And at that point, I became frightened, and I was a little terrified, thinking to myself that if anybody walks in the room now, I know we're in jeopardy, we're in trouble, because he shouldn't be giving me this information. And then he pulled out one of these mosaics and showed this base, which had geometric shapes. There were towers, there were spherical buildings, there were very tall towers, and things that looked somewhat like radar dishes, but they were large structures. If I compare it to what I'm seeing now, because I do have photographs that have artifacts in them that are similar to what I saw, they're massive. Some of the structures are, half a mile in size. So they're huge structures. Some of the buildings seem to have very reflective surfaces on them. A couple of structures that I saw reminded me of cooling towers at power generating plants. They had that sort of a shape. Some of them were just very, very straight and tall with a flat top. Some of them were round. Some of them looked like a Quonset hut, with a domed kind of, like a greenhouse. The particular shot that I saw, there were several clustered together over a landscape, a fairly large landscape. I didn't want to look at it any longer than that because I felt that my life was in jeopardy. Do you understand what I'm saying? I would love to have looked at it longer. I would have loved to have had copies. I would love to have, said more about it or discussed it more, but I knew I couldn't, and I knew that young fellow who was sharing this was really, really overstepping his bounds at that point.
Some people believe that this image reveals a secret history. In my opinion, that is not a natural structure. It's got to be some intelligent species that created it. In the 1960s, Ken Johnston was a NASA test pilot, but later as director of the Data and Photo Control Department at the Johnson Space Flight Center. He says on one of the moon missions, the astronauts came back with intriguing photographs.
I was in kind of shock. And some of the craters would actually show domes and actual bases.
Bases on the moon? Ken's talking about these rounded dome-shaped objects in the middle of one of the craters. But what's even more shocking, Ken says when he asked his boss about the photos, he was told to stop asking.
And we argued a little bit. He finally said, I don't care what you do, just get rid of those pictures that were taken.
Is it a cover-up? One thing is certain, Ken's not the only person to believe there's been alien activity on the moon.
I saw this illumination that was moving with respect to the stars. We were smart enough to not say, Houston, there's a light out there that's following us. So technically, it becomes an unidentified flying object.
Apollo 11 astronaut Buzz Aldrin, the second man to walk on the moon, admits a UFO seemingly tracked the spacecraft from a relatively close distance. Although he persistently denies allegations that he and fellow astronaut Neil Armstrong encountered aliens on the moon, other former members of NASA say otherwise.
There have been a lot of rumors about what actually took place. During the lunar mission, while Neil and Buzz were on the lunar surface, back at the Johnson Space Center, during a couple of minutes of broken communication, Neil switched over to the medical channel to speak directly with the chief medical officer of the mission. And at that, the comment was, he says, they're here, they're parked around the rim of the crater, and they're watching us.